Welcome back to Grim Reality Logs. I am the mysterious nomad. Before we step into the dark together, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a log. There is a specific kind of quiet that belongs only to the night shift. Most people think silence is simply an absence of noise. But when you work alone, between the hours of midnight and dawn, you learn very quickly that silence has a weight to it. It has a texture. There is the safe silence, the kind that feels like a heavy blanket, meaning the rest of the world is asleep and you are secure. And then, there is the wrong silence. The kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The kind that means the ambient noise of life has been sucked out of the room because something else has entered it. Tonight, we open the logs on 3 encounters from the graveyard shift, where the silence was the very first warning sign. My first real job out of college was working as the night auditor for an independent motel in the heavily wooded region of the Pacific Northwest. The property sat right off Highway 101, surrounded by miles of dense, towering pine trees that seemed to swallow the building whole once the sun went down. It was a modern, highly automated facility. Most guests checked in online and received a digital key code, meaning they rarely needed to interact with me. My job was primarily just to be a warm body in the building, run the financial reports at 3 a.m., and make sure the place did not burn down. I was stationed in a small, brightly lit lobby behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass. The management was proud of their security system. I had a bank of 6 television monitors on the desk in front of me, showing black and white camera feeds of the parking lot, the vending area, the exterior walkways, and the back alley. Below the monitors was a digital control panel that showed the status of every single room in the motel. A tiny green light meant a room was vacant and locked. A red light meant it was occupied. But there was also a small yellow light for the motion sensors inside each room, tied into the energy-saving thermostats. If someone walked around inside their room, the yellow light would pulse. It was a Tuesday night in late November. The motel was completely empty. Not a single red light on the board. The highway outside was dead, and a heavy, freezing fog had rolled in, obscuring the view from the exterior cameras. Usually, I found the solitude relaxing. I would bring a book, drink awful instant coffee, and enjoy the ambient sounds of the lobby. There was a large soda machine near the front door that had a distinct, comforting hum. The ice machine down the hall would periodically rumble and drop a fresh batch of ice. The heater in my booth blew a steady, warm current of air. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the heater kicked off. A few seconds later, the low hum of the soda machine in the lobby stopped. It was not a power outage. The lights were still on. The monitors were still glowing. It was just the natural cycle of the machines going into standby mode at the exact same time. But the sudden absence of sound was jarring. The silence that rushed into the lobby was heavy, almost suffocating. I remember swallowing hard, the sound of my own throat clicking sounding unnaturally loud. I looked out through the bulletproof glass into the lobby, and then out through the glass front doors into the thick white fog. Tap. 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 It was faint, but distinct. The sound of a fingernail striking glass. I froze, my eyes darting to the front doors. There was no one there. I quickly looked down at monitor number 2, which covered the front porch in the entrance. The screen showed nothing but the glowing halo of the porch light cutting through the thick mist. Completely empty. Tap. 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 It happened again, slightly louder this time. I stood up, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. I pressed my face close to the bulletproof glass of my enclosure, trying to peer into the lobby. The sound was not coming from the front doors. It was coming from the side wall of the lobby, an area covered by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out into the dense tree line. I stared into the darkness beyond the glass, but the glare of the lobby lights turned the windows into mirrors. I could only see my own pale reflection staring back at me. I sat back down, trying to rationalize it. A branch in the wind. A bird. A raccoon. I took a deep breath and looked down at my desk to gather my nerves. That was when I saw it. On the digital control panel, nestled among the sea of green lights indicating vacant rooms, a single yellow light was pulsing. Room 108. I stared at it, a cold dread washing over me. Room 108 was at the far end of the property, right on the edge of the woods. The green light was still solid, meaning the electronic lock had not been opened. No one had used a key card. But the motion sensor inside the room was actively picking up movement. I told myself it was a glitch. Mice, maybe. Or a faulty sensor. I watched the yellow light pulse for a full minute before it suddenly stopped. I exhaled a shaky breath, feeling foolish for getting so worked up. Then, the yellow light for room 107 began to pulse. My breath caught in my throat. Room 107 was right next door to 108, moving closer to the lobby. The green lock light remained solid. Whoever, or whatever, was in there had not opened the door. 10 seconds later, the light for 107 went dark. And the light for room 106 began to blink. Someone was moving through the rooms. Not the hallways. The rooms themselves. And they were heading straight toward the lobby. I used to work as a Tier 2 network technician at a massive corporate data center in the suburban Midwest. It was the winter of 2019, and I was assigned the grueling 12-hour night shift, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. If you have never been inside a commercial server farm, it is difficult to describe the sheer scale of the isolation. The building was essentially a windowless concrete bunker, the size of 3 football fields, filled with endless, identical aisles of towering black metal cabinets. Security was incredibly strict. To even get onto the data floor, you had to pass through a biometric scanner, enter a small holding room called a mantrap, wait for the heavy steel door behind you to lock, and then badge through a second security door. Once you were inside, you were completely cut off from the outside world. No cell phone service. No natural light. Just the harsh, sterile glare of overhead fluorescent tubes and the blinking blue and green LED lights of millions of dollars worth of networking equipment. But the most overwhelming part of the environment was the noise. There is no true silence in a server farm. There is only the roar. Thousands of high-speed cooling fans and massive industrial air conditioning units pump freezing air through the aisles 24 hours a day to keep the machines from melting down. The sound is a physical force. It vibrates in your chest and forces you to wear foam earplugs just to prevent hearing damage. Over a 12-hour shift, your brain simply gives up trying to process the noise. It filters out the deafening mechanical scream until it becomes a baseline, a kind of heavy, pressurized white noise that mimics absolute silence. It was around 4:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was completely alone on the floor, carrying my diagnostic laptop down aisle 42 to check on a server rack that was reporting a temperature fluctuation. I was walking slowly, staring down at my screen, letting the rhythmic, vibrating roar of the room wash over me. And then, I stepped into a void. It was as if I had walked through an invisible wall. The deafening roar of the cooling fan simply vanished. The sudden absence of sound was so violent, so completely unnatural, that I physically stumbled forward, dropping my laptop onto the cold anti-static floor tiles. I pulled my earplugs out, gasping for breath as panic flared in my chest. I was standing in the middle of aisle 42, but the entire row of cabinets to my left was completely dead. Dozens of racks, hundreds of servers, completely powered down. No blinking lights. No spinning fans. Just a wall of warm, silent black metal. That was impossible. A failure of that magnitude would have triggered catastrophic alarms throughout the building. The backup generators should have instantly kicked in. But there were no alarms. Just a terrifying, localized pocket of dead air in the middle of the facility. I knelt down to pick up my laptop, my hands shaking violently. As I grabbed the plastic casing, my flashlight beam caught something on the pristine white floor tiles. Footprints. They were large, maybe a size 12, heavily treaded work boot. And they were caked in thick, wet mud. I stared at them, my mind completely short-circuiting. A data center is a clean room environment. Sticky mats at every entrance strip dust from your shoes. Wet, dripping mud inside the server aisles meant someone had completely bypassed the man-traps, the biometric scanners, and the security doors. I slowly stood up, my eyes following the trail of mud. The footprints led straight down the dead, silent aisle, stopping in front of server cabinet number 408. The heavy mesh metal door of the cabinet, which required a specialized physical key to open, was swung wide open. I took a step backward, the rubber sole of my sneaker squeaking loudly against the floor tile in the dead silence of the aisle. Instantly, from 2 aisles over, I heard it. Squeak. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I held my breath, straining my ears against the distant roar of the active servers on the other side of the building. I waited 10 seconds. Nothing. I took one slow, agonizing step forward. Clack. A heavy boot hit the floor tiles exactly 1 aisle over. They were mirroring me. Whoever had shut down the power, whoever had tracked mud into the secure facility, was standing just on the other side of the metal cabinets. The server racks were 8 feet tall and completely opaque. I could not see them, but they were there, separated from me by only a few inches of metal and wiring. A wave of primal, nauseating terror washed over me. I was completely unarmed, locked in a windowless maze with an intruder who had effortlessly disabled a multi-million-dollar security system. I took another step. Clack. I took 2 quick steps backward. Clack. Clack. They were playing with me. A silent game of cat and mouse in the dark. I reached for the heavy metal flashlight on my belt, my palms slick with cold sweat. I knew the only exit was the main security man-trap, a full 200 yards away through a labyrinth of identical black corridors. If I ran, they would hear exactly where I was going. If I stayed, they only had to walk around the end of the aisle to trap me. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and slowly, silently, began to back away toward the main intersection of the floor, never taking my eyes off the end of the aisle, waiting for a shadow to step out into the light. In the early 2000s, I took a job as a night security guard for a sprawling, 24-hour self-storage facility on the absolute edge of the Nevada desert. The property was massive, a maze of long, identical cinderblock buildings with bright orange corrugated metal doors, stretching out over 10 acres of gravel and concrete. It was surrounded by a 10-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, but out there in the scrub brush and sand, the fence felt more like a suggestion than an actual barrier. Working the graveyard shift in the high desert during the winter introduces you to a very specific kind of sensory deprivation. The cold is dry and biting, dropping well below freezing, and the silence is absolute. There are no crickets, no distant highway sounds, no rustling leaves. Just a massive, dead quiet that makes the crunch of your own boots on the gravel sound like gunshots. My instructions were simple. Sit in the heated guard shack at the front gate, watch the fuzzy security monitors, and do a complete foot patrol of the property every 2 hours. Most nights, the only things I encountered were tumbleweeds caught against the fence or the occasional stray coyote slipping through the shadows. It was a Thursday night, right around 3:30 a.m., the moon was hidden behind a thick bank of clouds, making the property pitch black outside of the sickly yellow glow of the sodium vapor lights spaced out along the buildings. I zipped up my heavy parka, grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, and began my patrol down the main thoroughfare. As I turned down Road J, a long corridor of large, drive-up units situated at the very back of the property, I immediately felt a shift in the atmosphere. 2 of the overhead sodium lights were burned out, plunging the back half of the row into total darkness. The silence here felt different. It was heavy. Stagnant. Like the air itself was holding its breath. I stopped walking, letting the crunch of gravel fade away, and just listened. Nothing. Not even the wind. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam down the row of identical orange doors. About 50 yards down, right on the edge of the darkness, the beam caught something wrong. Unit J412. The heavy metal roll-up door was not flush with the concrete. It was raised about 3 inches. A cold spike of adrenaline hit my stomach. Break-ins were rare, but they happened. Usually, it was a pair of bolt cutters and a quick grab and dash. But there were no vehicles in the aisle. No cut padlocks lying on the ground. The latch was completely undone, and the door was simply resting slightly open. I approached slowly, keeping my footsteps as light as possible. As I got within 10 feet, a strange, utterly out-of-place smell hit me. It was not the usual scent of dust, old cardboard, and mothballs that usually leaked out of these units. It was the sharp, unmistakable smell of unburned propane, mixed with the rich aroma of cheap, brewing coffee. I stopped right in front of the unit, my heart pounding in my ears. I crouched down and aimed my flashlight through the 3-inch gap, expecting to see boxes or old furniture. Instead, the beam illuminated a worn, floral pattern rug laid out over the cold concrete. Just beyond the rug was a bare mattress on the floor, covered in a tangled mass of heavy sleeping bags. Next to the mattress was a small, battery-powered camping lantern, turned off, and a portable propane camping stove. Sitting on top of the stove was an aluminum percolator. Right next to it, resting on an overturned milk crate, was a ceramic mug. Thick, white steam was actively rising from the dark liquid inside. My breath hitched. Someone was living in here. And based on the steam rising from that mug, they had just poured that coffee seconds ago. I swept the beam further into the darkness of the unit, looking for a pair of boots, a shadow, anything. But the back corners were piled high with plastic storage bins, creating perfect blind spots. I slowly stood up and reached for the 2-way radio clipped to my belt to call the local police dispatcher. I pressed the transmit button. The radio gave a weak, pathetic click, and the green power light flickered and died. The battery was completely dead. I was entirely alone at the back of a 10-acre labyrinth, standing outside the door of someone who was hiding in the dark, watching my ankles through the gap. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, intending to quietly retreat to the guard shack and call 911 from the landline. Before my boot even touched the gravel, the silence of the desert was shattered. From the pitch-black darkness at the very end of Row J, a loud, metallic screech echoed through the cold air. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy, ungreased metal storage door being violently thrown open. I whipped my flashlight toward the end of the row, the beam cutting through the dusty air, but it was not strong enough to penetrate the shadows. Then, right across the aisle from me, Unit J411 let out a deafening metallic groan. The latch clicked, and the orange door began to slowly roll upward, inch by inch, into its metal track. I froze, pure panic locking my muscles in place. I watched as the door rose to knee height, then waist height, revealing absolute blackness inside. Before it even stopped, a second metallic screech echoed from 2 units down on my left. Then another from further down the row on my right. Clack. Screech. Rumble. The heavy metal doors were rolling up, one by one, staggering down the aisle in the pitch-black darkness, boxing me in. And I had absolutely no idea what was waiting inside them. I did not wait to see what was coming out of those units. I dropped my dead radio, turned on my heel, and ran blindly toward the front gate. The sound of my boots slamming against the gravel was deafening, but it was not enough to drown out the metallic screech of more doors rolling open behind me. It was not just one person. It was a coordinated group. As I sprinted past Row H and Row G, I could hear heavy footsteps hitting the pavement, fanning out into the intersecting aisles. They were not yelling. They were not speaking at all. The only sounds were the slapping of their shoes on the concrete and the heavy, ragged breathing echoing through the cold desert air. I knew I could not outrun them all the way to the guard shack. It was a straight, illuminated shot down the main driveway, and I would be entirely exposed under the sodium lights. I took a sharp left down Row D, an aisle populated entirely by massive, outdoor parking spots for recreational vehicles and boats. I dove underneath the chassis of a rusted, 30-foot motorhome, dragging my body over the frozen gravel until I was completely concealed behind its dual rear tires. I pressed my face into the dirt, clamping both hands over my mouth to muffle the sound of my own hyperventilating. Less than 30 seconds later, 2 sets of footsteps crunched past the front of the motorhome. I watched their silhouettes block out the ambient light. They were moving quickly, sweeping flashlight beams under the vehicles. I closed my eyes, waiting for the beam to hit my face, waiting for the shout. But they moved past me, continuing down the road toward the front gate. I stayed pinned under that motorhome for 3 agonizing hours. I did not move a single muscle as the desert temperature plummeted, freezing the sweat to my skin. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was crawling with anticipation. It was not until the first sliver of gray dawn broke over the horizon and the automated front gate opened for the day shift manager that I finally crawled out. When the county sheriff deputies arrived and swept the property in the daylight, what they found was worse than a simple break-in. Unit J412 was exactly as I had seen it, complete with the cold coffee and the sleeping bags. But when they opened the units that had rolled up around me, they found the truth. The cinder block walls separating the units at the back of row J had been methodically sledgehammered out from the inside. It was a rat king of interconnected rooms. 7 different units had been combined into a massive, hidden compound right under our noses. They found stolen merchandise, yes. But in Unit J410, the one that had opened right next to me, they found a stack of heavy-duty zip ties, a roll of duct tape, and a hand-drawn map of my exact patrol route, complete with the times I usually walked past each row. They were not just squatting. They were waiting for me. And if my radio had not died, if I had not turned and ran the exact second I did, I would have been pulled into that pitch-black unit, and the heavy metal door would have rolled down right behind me. All 3 of these logs share a common thread, a grim reality about the spaces we inhabit when the rest of the world is unconscious. We build these massive, automated structures, motels, data centers, storage facilities, and we staff them with skeleton crews, relying on cameras and electronic locks to keep the dark at bay. But technology is a thin veil. For the night auditor in the Pacific Northwest, the terror came from the realization that the system meant to protect them was being actively used to track an intruder's silent approach. The police arrived 20 minutes after the 911 call, but the motel was completely empty. The master keycard log showed no entries. But the mud on the carpets in rooms 108, 107, and 106 proved that someone had been quietly scaling the exterior balconies, slipping through sliding glass doors left unlocked by previous housekeeping shifts, playing a silent game of creeping closer and closer to the lobby. The auditor quit that same morning and never worked a night shift again. For the technician, the silence of the data center was a weapon. The intruder was never caught. The corporate investigation revealed that a disgruntled former contractor had retained physical access keys and had bypassed the biometric scanners by slipping in through the massive industrial ventilation shafts. They had purposely cut the power to aisle 42 just to watch the technician panic in the dark. The technician suffered a severe mental breakdown, diagnosed with acute post-traumatic stress disorder. To this day, they cannot sleep without a fan running on high, terrified of what might be hiding in the sudden absence of sound. And for me, the storage guard in the desert, the price paid was a permanent loss of security. I left Nevada a week later. I cannot walk past a closed door without wondering who is standing on the other side, holding their breath, waiting for the right moment to turn the handle. Evolution has trained the human brain to ignore the steady, predictable noises of our environment. But when those noises suddenly stop, our primal instincts take over. We recognize that in the natural world, the forest only goes dead silent when a predator is hunting. The graveyard shift strips away the illusion of safety, leaving you alone in the concrete forests we have built, waiting for the silence to drop. If you want to keep these logs open, leave a like and subscribe to Grim Reality Logs. Let me know in the comments which story kept you up tonight. Stay safe.